Have you ever tried to help someone with a project by giving them advice only for them not to take it? It is their choice on what they do, but sometimes their choices and their problems come right back to you. So I was told this mower needed its yearly maintenance only for them to admit the truth. Come to find out, it won't start, and the reason is based solely on their choice to ignore you. And they don't want your advice, instead, they need your help. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Toro lawnmower, and the problem is that after its winter storage, it now won't start. If you didn't know, depending on what kind of fuel you put into your tank and how long it's been stored for, the carb could develop a clog and keep it from working like it should. So this is something I've mentioned to my coworker who owns this mower on more than one occasion. And unfortunately, this time they got caught with their pants down because they didn't take any of my advice that would have prevented this problem. So my first piece of advice was to run the mower out of gas on the last mow of the season. And as you might have guessed, they didn't do that. Now the second piece of advice was that if they didn't run the mower out of gas was to start it in the middle of winter for a couple of minutes. And as you guessed it again, that didn't happen either. Now that we know there's plenty of fuel and oil in the engine, let's try and start it and see what it does and doesn't do. So as you just saw, it didn't even try and start, but before we dig into the carb, we'll try priming it with some fresh fuel first. And with that bit of fresh gasoline, we were able to get it to start and it kept running. But just to be certain, we're going to try that again, except this time we won't prime it with any fuel. So what exactly just happened? Why didn't it start on its own, but we were able to coax it back to life? So there are a couple of reasons why it didn't start on its own, the first being stale gasoline in the carb. Notice that I said carb and not the fuel tank, and that's because the owner told me that the fuel tank was almost empty when they put it up for winter. The fact is, you don't need all the gasoline in the fuel tank to go bad, just what's inside the carb to end up having problems. And by priming the engine with good fuel, you can force the carb to use the bad fuel in the carb until the new stuff can make it to the carb. The other possibility is that the fuel jet is closed up just enough to not allow the carb to work like it should. But by forcing the engine to run, it could be enough to clear the jet and allow it to work again. So how many times can you force the engine to start and run on the hopes that it'll fix itself? Well, you can do it as many times as you want, but be realistic. After a handful of times and it doesn't work, then it's time to move on to something else. This one, however, responded very well and should be ready to use once we do its yearly maintenance and do a quick cleaning. So would I have charged them any differently if they'd been upfront about the mower? Not really, just so long as I didn't have to replace any parts like the carb, the pricing would have been the same. So back to the maintenance, one of the most overlooked items when sharpening the blade is checking its balance. If the blade is severely out of balance, it could damage the mower, not to mention the engine. Also, when balancing the blade, be aware of any kind of buildup of dirt or grass because it could affect it. You don't need anything fancy when it comes to balancing the blade, a nail in the fence post will do. So these wheels are spinning quite well and probably don't need any kind of service. However, if you want to keep them working well for a while, then a light cleaning and lube will help out. Now if you want to use a heavy grease, that's your choice. I just like using this one because it's easy to use. So how often do you need to do this type of maintenance work? Well, that's totally up to you, but I would try and do this at least once a year at the beginning of the season. But if you feel that's not enough, then you're welcome to do it as many times a year as you want. Also, don't be surprised if your wheel is stuck to the axle if you haven't cleaned it before. Now the drive wheels are a bit different, and the reason why is because of the transmission. They are not designed to freewheel and will definitely benefit from lubricating them only if to keep the self-propel working like it should. You will not only want to clean the bolt the wheel spins on, but also lubricate all the contact points on the driveline. Now some systems will have bushings while others will have bearings that'll work a whole lot better with a spray of some kind of lube on them. Now you can use whatever brand of lubricant you have, there's no need to go out and get something specific for this one. Also, don't forget to spray some kind of lube on the height adjusters, that way they'll be easier to use. To be honest, even if you did this just once in the lifetime of your mower, it'll still fare better than if you did nothing at all. The same thing can be said about changing your oil, but I'll say more about that here in a bit when we pour it in. This wheel is now working the best it can and won't fight the engine when using the drive. So I don't like to change air filters, I'm more of the hitting it on the table to clean it type. However, since they're paying for a tune-up, they'll get a brand new one. So if you do plan ahead and buy a multi-pack, each one will be cheap. But if you buy a single one, just be prepared to pay quite a lot of money for it. Nothing wrong with paying $7 for one of these, but that's about twice as much as I'd want to pay for it. So you can keep reusing a cleaned out air filter, but after several seasons, eventually it'll start to not seal as well as it should, which means dirt or even possibly grass could get into the engine, causing all sorts of problems. Personally, I don't think I'd keep the original filter for more than 4 seasons, and by then it'll be tough to clean anyway. Now because this is an overhead valve engine, you'll need to check the clearances once in a while. But because I checked and adjusted them last year, they won't need it this year. But next year though, I plan on checking them, and even by then, they shouldn't need any adjustments. Next, I want to take out the spark plug, not because I intend on replacing it, but instead inspect it for any possible problems, one of which would be carbon buildup. This happens most often when the engine is burning more oil than it should, or when the air filter is clogged. Now this one has a bit more carbon on it than you'd expect for an engine this young, and the spark plug shows it. So you can replace it each and every spring, or you can do what I'm doing and clean it instead. Now you don't have to clean it, but after some time the carbon buildup could be enough to interfere with the spark. You don't have to use fire to do this, you can use chemicals instead, however I don't find them to be as fun. Just remember to let the spark plug cool off before you touch it, otherwise you'll have a permanent reminder for a couple of weeks. If I had to guess, I'd say the spark plug would need about 4 or 5 years before the carbon was a problem. But depending on the health of your engine, it'll be different. That's why checking it at the beginning of the season is a good idea. So why is it so important to do your first oil change? And that is to get rid of the break-in material. The first oil change you do on an engine like this one will be the dirtiest, so getting rid of it is essential. So if your mower is newer, it's important to do that first oil change sooner than later. Also, because of the way these engines are designed, make sure not to put too much oil in it. Now I'm not talking about a small amount over full, I'm talking about several ounces too much. It's also a good idea to check the oil again once the engine's been ran at least once. I've had it where I thought the oil level was good, but after running it and checking the oil on flat ground, turns out I needed just a bit more. So after spraying some lube on the cables, we'll start it up and make sure it's running just like it should be. So it started on the first pull and it's been running for about 10 minutes. But the big question is, will it start back up when the engine is hot? So it did start back up while it was hot with no problems at all. Now if yours needs several pulls to start back up, then it could mean that the valves need adjusting. I'm pretty sure you can hear it, but this engine could be in better health. This mower was not taken care of by the previous owner, and unfortunately these newer engines can't take that sort of abuse, at least not like the older flatheads. However, I do believe this engine will still last for several more years with continued maintenance, but that's up to the new owner now. So my question, is your lawnmower up to date on its maintenance cycle? So it does not have to be a yearly cycle, any time interval will do, just so long as it's on one. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.